When you think of Texas wealth, the images are completely predictable. You think of oil barons with sprawling ranches outside Midland. You think of tech billionaires relocating from Silicon Valley. You picture the names on the Forbes 400 list. But the most aggressive accumulation of generational wealth in this state is happening right now in Houston. It is happening along a 6-mile commercial corridor on the southwest side of the city. The families who control this corridor arrived decades ago with refugee papers. Some came with less than $100. Today they own the physical land beneath entire shopping districts. They control vertically integrated supply chains that capture every dollar before it can leave the network. You will never find their names on a wealthy elite list. They intentionally structure their portfolios to stay invisible. They bury their assets behind webs of anonymous holding companies. This is a forensic analysis of Houston's invisible empire and the exact mechanical blueprint of one of the biggest Texas dynasties you have never heard of. If you want to find the richest people in Texas, the standard playbook is to check Forbes. You look for executives with publicly traded stock options. You track public SEC filings and formal banking assets. But traditional wealth tracking has a structural flaw. It only measures wealth that wants to be seen. The most aggressive financial accumulation operates entirely in the dark. It is decentralized, it is fiercely private, and it is completely invisible to every wealth tracker on Wall Street. To understand why, you need to understand what happened to Houston in 1982. The oil bust detonated across the Texas economy that year like a controlled demolition. Houston lost 211,000 jobs between February 1982 and March 1987. 1 in 8 Houstonians was unemployed. 10 cities appeared across the city. Mainstream developers fled the market. Banks collapsed. 1 in 3 Texas savings and loan institutions went under. White flight property owners handed banks the keys to their real estate and left town. And the land along a stretch of Bellaire Boulevard on the southwest side of the city sat cheap, flat, and completely ignored. At the exact moment the mainstream economy was in total collapse, immigrant investors recognized an open door, and they walked through it. The story of Houston's invisible empire begins not with a single family or a single building. It begins with counter-cyclical timing. The land along Bellaire Boulevard was not premium real estate in the early 1980s. Residents who grew up there describe it as grassland, literally cows grazing on the grass. A 2-lane street that flooded when it rained. Beltway 8 did not exist yet. Mainstream Texas developers ignored it completely. In 1981, D.T. Wong arrived in Houston from Los Angeles, originally from Hong Kong, looking for new opportunities. In 1983, Kenneth Lee and his uncle T.D. Wong revitalized a shopping plaza at Bellaire and Rochester, opening Deho Market, the first Asian supermarket on the corridor. When the oil bust drove real estate prices even lower, out-of-state Chinese-American investors moved in. One developer documented the calculus precisely at the time. The sharp drop in real estate provided investors with opportunities to enter the local market that did not exist during the boom. Dynasty Plaza followed in 1987, a 120,000 square foot complex built by a Singaporean developer who had been personally invited to build in Houston. The financial logic underneath all of it was identical. Do not lease the storefront. Buy the physical dirt, block by block. Then in the 1990s, Vietnamese-American commercial development arrived in force on the western end of the corridor, past Beltway 8. Rising property taxes and gentrification had pushed Vietnamese businesses out of their original Midtown enclave along Milam Street. They moved southwest into land that had been priced down by the oil bust and ignored by the mainstream market. In 1998, Vietnamese-American developer Hai Du Duong built Hong Kong City Mall on 25.5 acres he had reportedly purchased at $1 per square foot. A lotus pond, more than 100 stores, a full banquet hall anchoring the complex. It became the symbolic center of what was now a 6-square-mile Pan-Asian commercial district, unlike anything else in the American South. The Vietnamese-dominated western stretch, from Beltway 8 toward Eldridge Parkway, became officially designated as Saigon Boulevard by the city of Houston. But owning the concrete is only step one. Buying a strip mall does not build a generational dynasty. To achieve true wealth, you must capture every single dollar moving through the building. Before you can understand the wealth mechanics of this corridor, you need to understand one structural innovation that mainstream real estate analysts almost never discuss: retail condos. In standard American commercial real estate, a business owner opens a shop and pays rent to a landlord. The landlord captures the long-term wealth. The tenant builds nothing. The families along Bellaire Boulevard systematically refused this model. They structured their shopping centers so that businesses own the individual spaces they operate in, rather than lease them. This ownership model is rare across American commercial real estate. It is essentially non-existent outside areas populated by East Asian American entrepreneurs. The Bellaire corridor is one of the most concentrated examples of this model anywhere in the United States. When property values rise, and across this corridor over 4 decades, they have risen dramatically, the wealth does not transfer to an outside landlord. It stays inside the community. It accumulates inside the same family networks that built the corridor in the first place. Multiply this across dozens of commercial plazas over 40 years. You have the structural foundation of a multi-generational real estate dynasty that never shows up on a wealth tracker. But owning the real estate was only the outer shell of the operation. The inner architecture was something far more sophisticated. The real secret to this empire was vertical integration. They engineered a completely closed economic loop. Most business owners open a restaurant and pay a landlord. They pay external suppliers for raw ingredients. They pay an outside trucking company for delivery. Capital bleeds outward at every single operational step. The most sophisticated operators along this corridor refused to let money exit the network. They systematically acquired their entire supply chain. They did not simply operate the noodle shop, they bought the commercial plaza housing the restaurant. Then they launched the wholesale food distribution company, supplying it. Then they acquired the regional logistics firm handling delivery. Now follow the path of a single dollar inside this system. A customer pays for a meal at the restaurant. The restaurant buys wholesale ingredients, paid to a related company. That supplier pays the trucking firm for delivery, another related company. The restaurant also pays monthly rent to the plaza, owned by the same family network. Every node in that transaction chain is controlled by the same people. That dollar does not escape. It bounces continuously between internally owned entities. The family effectively collects it 3 or 4 times before it disappears. This closed-loop architecture generated compounding cash flow across decades. It built multiple substantial fortunes in the heart of Texas. But this creates a glaring contradiction. If they built one of the most profitable economic engines in the state, why did they intentionally erase their names from the public record? Traditional wealth rankings rely on public SEC filings. They rely on corporate press releases and named founders. These Texas families deploy the exact opposite playbook. Pull commercial property records for the Bellaire corridor today. You will find multi-million-dollar plazas owned by obscure LLCs with names that reveal nothing. Trace those LLCs to their registered addresses. They lead to post office boxes. No founder names attached to the deeds. No press releases. No Forbes profiles. This is not an accident. It is a deliberate financial architecture rooted in a specific historical trauma that most outside observers never understand. The founders of these dynasties survived communist asset seizures after the fall of Saigon. They watched the Vietnamese government confiscate businesses, properties, and bank accounts from families who had built visible wealth. They learned one economic lesson so deeply it became structural: visibility, vulnerability. If the government knows exactly what you own, they can take it. So they engineered their American empires to be invisible by design. The result is a shadow elite class in Houston that wields enormous economic power across the region, while remaining entirely off the radar of mainstream wealth measurement. This secrecy was the survival mechanism of the first generation. But the empire is now undergoing a quiet structural evolution. The capital built in the dark is beginning to move into the light. The first generation built the empire with cash. They operated outside the traditional banking system by necessity and by design. The second generation executes a fundamentally different playbook. They grew up attending American universities. They understand institutional capital structures. They do not manage retail storefronts or wholesale grocery logistics. They operate commercial real estate development firms built on the foundation of their parents' accumulated capital. The Ho family trajectory illustrates this shift precisely. Bin and Hue Ho immigrated from Vietnam and built a multi-million-dollar real estate and banking empire in Houston. Their son Washington co-founded White House Global Properties and its commercial division, HGP Commercial. In 2025, HGP announced major mixed-use development projects across the Houston metro, including an entertainment district near Katy Mills Mall and a restaurant corridor in northwest Houston. The pattern is consistent across the second-generation cohort. The heirs take the accumulated capital of the first generation. They funnel it into formal corporate structures. They use that verified liquidity to approach institutional lenders. They secure development financing on a scale the first generation could never access. They demolish the original single-story strip malls. They replace them with premium mixed-use developments. The shadow capital assembled in the dark across 40 years of disciplined accumulation has been converted into institutional leverage inside the formal economy. The invisible empire is building a new skyline. When you picture Texas wealth, the old archetypes dominate. You imagine sprawling cattle ranches. You picture oil derricks pumping crude. But the modern economic engine of Houston looks completely different. It looks like 6 square miles of Bellaire, built on counter-cyclical land acquisition when the rest of Texas was in economic freefall. The families who engineered this did not simply work hard and get lucky. They executed a specific, replicable, multi-generational system. They identified land the mainstream market had written off. They acquired it when prices were at their lowest. They structured ownership to stay inside the community through retail condos rather than leases. They built vertically integrated supply chains that recycled every dollar before it could exit the network. They engineered ownership structures specifically designed to stay invisible. Then they transferred that capital to the next generation with the tools to convert it into institutional leverage. The dynasties that will define Houston's economy for the next 50 years are not being tracked by Forbes. They are not on the cover of Texas Monthly. They are not in the press at all. Because the most durable wealth is the kind that never wanted to be found. The most powerful dynasties do not want to be on the cover of Forbes. They simply want to own the block you are standing on.